Sveiki, čia Algimantas Kvecys, Skeptikų draugijos narys ir pirmininkas. Čia yra dar vienas skeptiškų pokalbių epizodas ir šį kartą svečiuose yra Strmiska. Ir su juo pakalbėsime apie krikščioniškąjį nacionalizmą, Christian nationalism ir kitas susijusias temas. Ir norėčiau pristatyti Michaelą ir pereisim į anglų kalbą. So Strmiska is a doctor in religious studies from Boston University, a professor of world history in global studies department at SUNY-Orange College in the New York State, visiting professor from United States through the Fulbright fellowship program, teaching a course of Asian religions in Vilnius University, and teaching anthropology in religion for Riga Stradins University in Latvia. So, hello, Michael.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you for being here. So, first question would be quite, personal maybe. Why you are bringing this topic in your studies in Lithuania? Why you want to spread those ideas about this movement, about this political and religious movement, and what drives you to dig deeper and, of course, for public to know more about this?
Well, I would say I don't really want to talk about this. I'm not really choosing to, but it seems kind of unavoidable at this time because this kind of thing is becoming a big force, not only in America, but in the world right now. And when I look back, when I first did my graduate studies 30 years ago, I can't believe I'm that old, but it's true. Back then, the way of studying religion was to completely avoid politics. That religion was this special thing, like we were studying these eternal sacred truths, a lot of emphasis on the scriptures and the philosophies, but not so much on the relationship to society or especially relationship to politics. But over time, living in America, I've seen religion playing a bigger and bigger role in our politics. And I can mention a couple of turning points. In 1976, when Jimmy Carter ran for president, he made it part of his campaign to tell the public that he was a born-again Christian.
Born-again Christian?
Yes.
What does it mean?
It means like an evangelical Christian who's undergone a religious experience that's considered a second birth, thus born again. Mm-hmm. So that was a big change because previously, for many years in America, politicians would not talk too much about religion. They felt, just leave it aside, that's more of a personal thing. Actually, one exception, when John F. Kennedy ran for president in 1960, there was concern about him being a Catholic. People thought, if he's Catholic, does that mean he'll be controlled by the Catholic Church and the Pope?
Oh,
so he made
independent.
Right. So he made a speech and a big statement saying, no, religion is separate. It will not interfere with how I operate as a leader, as a president. Mm-hmm. But then we come 16 years later, Jimmy Carter, proud of being a born-again Christian. Then we come to 2000, the year 2000, when George W. Bush is running for president. And in an interview, he is asked, who is your favorite philosopher? And his answer, my favorite philosopher is Jesus Christ because he changed my life. And what he's referring to is in his earlier years, he had been through a period of being an alcoholic, and by getting into Christianity, it helped him overcome the alcoholism and go on to be governor and eventually president. So he wove it into his image, his story. But with Donald Trump, we see something quite different happening because Trump himself has never been considered a very religious person.
Sure.
But conservative Christians latched onto him because they sensed or they received his message that he was willing to work with them to advance their interests. So at first, many conservative Christians in 2016 saw Trump as a useful tool for their purposes, such as opposing abortion, such as bringing prayer back into schools, and things of this sort. But then over time, his relationship to Christian conservatism, or I should say conservative Christianity, kind of mutated over time to where they saw him not just as like a useful partner, but as like a really special figure. And in the recent election, some treat him almost like he is a messiah, like he has some special link to God. And Trump has done a lot with iconography. You know, he's a very image-conscious person. Back in his New York real estate days, he always wanted to be in the newspaper with a nice picture. Later on, he's a reality TV star. He notices how important it is how people perceive you. He has some involvement in professional wrestling, and he sees how that kind of drama makes a big impact on people, the good guy versus the bad guy, the winner versus the loser. So in recent times, or even actually going back to his first term as president, he did a lot of things to visually associate himself with Christianity.
Such as?
Like a famous photo where he went to a church near the White House and stood there holding a Bible and made a speech. And actually, some of the officials who went with him were unhappy about it because they didn't want to be involved in associating the government with religion.
This was one of the first moves, as you would say.
I'm not sure.
I remember that frame,
I'm
that
not sure
picture.
I'm not sure it was first, but it was a really important one because it made a big impression. Ironically, though, and many people have commented on this, he was actually holding the Bible upside down, where some people joked, maybe showed a certain satanic attitude. But that, I don't think that's the case. That was just something people joked about, but that became part of the story. And then he would meet with religious leaders, Christian American religious leaders in the White House. He'd give them a lot of attention. And so he built a kind of foundation for himself as a religious figure. And then after leaving office, when he faced legal difficulties for various actions that he was accused of and had to go to court and defend himself, he took up this theme of being persecuted. And many Christians could relate to that because they felt like...
As a Christian persecution.
Right, like the way Jesus was persecuted. And then last summer, when he was running for president again, the assassination attempt, where he was shot, there was blood coming out of his ear, and he held up his fist, and many people saw that as a Messiah move.
It's a sign.
That's it. That, you know, he's being persecuted, they're trying to kill him, but he will still fight for us, was the feeling many people had. In fact, one good friend of mine in the States said when he saw that happen, when he watched it on TV, he said, that's it, Trump won the election.
After this.
Because that symbolism is very effective.
It's too strong, you know. Yeah.
So these are some of the things that have made me more and more concerned about this kind of thing.
Okay, so, but what is it actually? Is it a new term? Because different groups of people want more power and want their representatives to be elected, and they call each other names, you know.
Yeah.
And is because I hear that people who are described as Christian nationalists, they don't avoid that term. They encourage using that term, and they feel proud about that. It's not only academic term. So what's under that, and what's not, and why? Is there something different than there was like earlier regarding of ideas, you know, the goals?
Well, I think it's complicated because when we look into history of the U.S., we could see times when there was something like this before, but not in the current form. I mean, if we go back to the early founding of the U.S., I mean, not even the U.S., but the colonies that were established before we had U.S., the Puritans and Pilgrims came over with a religious agenda. They each wanted to create a religious society. That was their main purpose. And then others disagreed with that. And that disagreement has remained alive in American history. Those who think America should be a primarily Christian society or nation, and those who believe that there should be limits on religion, but that what's more important is that we have freedom, that people are able to coexist, that we have a functioning society, but not that religion should be dominant. As I said, in the 20th century, most leaders would downplay religion, but it began to be noticed by some that it was a useful strategy in politics, that if you talk about being a Christian, you can get support from Christians, especially conservative Christians. And I guess I should add the point that also, on the other side of the political spectrum, more on the left side, the civil rights movement was guided by religious figures like Martin Luther King, who was a minister. And they believed that religious ideas were involved in black people's quest for equality and freedom. So there are different sides to it. But I would say what's different about modern day Christian nationalism is that previously, let's say in the 20th century, early 21st century, most people in politics or in public life who were trying to pay special attention to Christianity would usually do it in the context of acknowledging that we have a diverse society, that Christianity is important, it has a long history, there are many Christians, many churches, but we also have people who are not religious or who have different religions. We have Jews, we have Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, what have you. What's different with the modern day Christian nationalism is that they're very insistent. They want America to be primarily Christian.
It's exclusionary.
Well, they don't answer that in a really clear way. They will not go so far as to say other religions should be abolished, but they make clear that Christianity must be dominant. It must be on top. I would compare it to India today, where we have what is often called Hindu nationalism.
Yeah.
Where the political party associated with the Hindu nationalism does not say that other religions should be abolished. But what they will say is, if these people want to live in our country, they have to accept that, in a sense, they'll be second class, that Hinduism will be on top, and they can have a place, but they have to always respect Hinduism. And I think this may be where the Christian nationalism is heading in America. But currently, I believe most of the figures associated simply don't want to talk about this topic because they know it would offend and disturb a lot of people. They just say, we love Jesus, we're a Christian nation. If you say, what about the Buddhists? What about the Muslims? They'll say, well, yeah, they're nice people too. They don't want to talk about it too much. In the recent time, during the period of President Trump's presidency, his ex-presidency, and his return, these groups are becoming more and more vocal and more organized that they want America, or the American public life, to be dominated by Christianity. And
did Trump directly supported and vocalized those ideas? Like we are exceptional and Christian first. Did he gave permission of that discourse by himself publicly and openly? I'm not saying on his rallies, but in the context when all of America is involved and watching, like on public interview on even leftist channels or something like that.
Well, it's a bit
Did he?
it's a bit difficult to evaluate Donald Trump's communications because there are so many of them, and so often he doesn't even speak in complete sentences. He just throws out a lot of fragments of ideas. But on many occasions, he has expressed support for Christian nationalists. He has appeared with them. He has not made a speech saying, I am a Christian nationalism, we must have Christian nationalism. But he is with these people enough, and he talks enough about the need. Very recently, he made a statement about, or he made the statement, we're going to bring religion back. Now you notice, he didn't say,
so it's the same slogans as "Make America Great Again," "Dig, dig, dig," "Let's bring religion back." It's the same, like equal statements.
In a way. But you notice he's being a bit careful. He's not saying we're going to bring Christianity back. He's saying we'll bring religion back. And if you think of it as political strategy, it's smart because that can sound good to Jews, to Muslims, to other conservative people in other religions who think that he's talking about things like maybe we'll get support for religious schools and things like this. But considering his network of associations and associates, those who are really paying attention know what he's meaning primarily is Christianity.
Like he's not meeting with other religious communities and spending time with them.
Obama and Biden would have Muslims in the White House to celebrate Muslim holidays, for example. Trump does not. They had. Trump does not do that. Trump only has Christian leaders. Well, maybe he did something for Passover. I don't want to preclude that. But his main focus is definitely celebrating Christian events with Christian leaders.
So it's like subliminal messages, like hidden messages which
Trump knows marketing. And he knows that it seems to me that one of his key strategies is to repeat things over and over and over in different ways. And if you say something even in a kind of soft way, but you're constantly saying it, it takes on more weight over time. So.
Okay. You mentioned a bit of Puritans, that religious wars and ideological wars, but I want to touch a bit on I listed just them like Founding Fathers, Declaration of Independence, and Constitution. Time to time, I hear from religious leaders in USA, political activists, and they want to bring up some points and ideas about how that nation of the USA was built and on what foundations it was built. And of course, Christianity comes up. There's a whole debate about deism, Christianity, what Founding Fathers believed, what is in the Declaration, what is in the Constitution, what does it mean? Should we interpret how they saw at that time, probably, or how do we see that? What role that mythologizing of creating a nation on the foundations of religious ideas play in that Christian nationalist agenda and discourse? Is it a big card? Is it a useful card? Or how do you see that actually? Do you have any ideas or knowledge how it actually was? And maybe it was a Christian nation after all.
Let me say how I think it was, my understanding. The Founding Fathers, the people who signed the Declaration and drew up the Constitution eventually, they were not Christian nationalists. Because if they wanted to make a religious republic, they would have just continued what the Puritans and the Pilgrims did in Massachusetts. They did not want that.
They had the power for that.
Well, I mean, they had the model right in front of them. But the country had moved away from that, and so had they, because it caused so many problems. And many people just didn't want to live under that kind of really what could be called religious tyranny. And when they drew up the documents, they mention religion as something to be protected. We have a First Amendment. So freedom of religion is protected, but it does not say religion is the basis of government. It just says religion is something in our society we should respect, we should protect so that people can be free to practice. Because remember, in preceding times, in Europe, there have been all these religious wars, Protestants against Catholics and others. Clearly, religion could be a source of great strife and suffering, so they were trying to create a safe space for religion. And they include in the Constitution the very strong statement that there shall be no state establishment of religion, meaning the government shall not endorse or reinforce any particular religion. So those are very strong statements, and I think the Christian nationalists, they tend to look away from this, and they are more attracted to the narrative of the Puritans and the Pilgrims coming to America for religious freedom. That's what they really like.
Establishing like another kingdom.
Well, kind of theocracy.
Yeah.
A theocracy. And the founding documents clearly say, hey guys, this is not a theocracy. We don't want a theocracy. We want people to be free to have different religions or even to have no religion.
But it's not mentioned specifically.
What?
Because maybe they had in mind that there's a freedom of religion, but freedom of religion to practice Christianity. There are no other religions. Maybe they had that in mind, freedom to express that one religion.
Well, I think probably even in the discussions, that was probably open to different interpretation by the different people involved. But again, I would go back to the most obvious point. If they wanted to make the country centered on Christianity, they could have said so. And by the time that these documents are being drawn up, we're in the period of the Enlightenment, people are very well aware there are different religions in the world. So I would say the case is very weak for saying that they only meant Christianity, because they could have said so if they wanted. There's no mention of the Bible. There's no mention of Jesus. There's nothing about particulars of Christianity. They just talk about the principle of freedom of religion in the Enlightenment context of the development of constitutional religion, where you have different freedoms and rights that the government is supposed to protect and respect. So I think the case is pretty strong that they were pro-religious freedom and they were against establishing Christianity as the main or only religion. On the other hand, it is true, most of these guys were Christians. So the Christian nationalists, they would refer to that and say, well, look, they were Christians, so of course this is what they meant. But we know that some of the founding fathers had very unorthodox, or at least very intellectual views of religion. And you referred to that earlier when people talk about deism.
Yes.
This idea that God is like the great engineer who created this system, and now we live in the system. But that's a far cry from straightforward biblical religion. And we know that Thomas Jefferson, do you know the story, how he created his own version of the Bible?
No.
Well,
Just
basically,
briefly,
he took the New Testament and he thought, there's a lot of really good things in the teachings of Jesus, good ethical principles like, love your neighbor, take care of the poor, be kind, this kind of thing. But he thought there's also stuff here that maybe is not so good for people, because all this stuff about miracles and supernatural stuff, that detracts from the simple effort to be a good person and have a good society. So his version of the New Testament, he snipped out all the stuff about Jesus performing miracles, like Jesus healing lepers or the blind, rising from the dead, virgin birth, all gone. So what you just get is Jesus, the religious or ethical teacher. Really,
just
Jesus,
a wise man.
Yeah, moral philosopher.
Yeah.
So that shows you where Jefferson's head was at. And Jefferson is also the one who came up with the phrase, a separation between church and state, a wall of separation between church and state. So they saw the danger. Again, I would refer to the fact Europe had been through these horrible religious wars. So they saw the danger that if government sides with one religion, it could lead to persecution of religions and or attack by another religion that wants to have the top position in society. So it seems to me
it's like very subjective point of stance, which can lead into the
well, preferential stance. If the government prefers religion, then the other religions are either going to be persecuted or they may fight. So the idea was create a neutral space for religion.
You want to elaborate more on how this is playing nowadays, that card, and the state and church separation? That phrase, I think it's very uncomfortable.
Well, some of the Christian nationalists or people associated with them have said they explicitly want to obliterate that idea. They say they don't believe in that idea. And that idea is not in the Constitution, it's in other documents. It's often understood as we might say it's an appendix to the Constitution. Mm-hmm. It's something extra that is related. But they say, no, we don't want that. But of the two main constitutional principles, freedom of religion and that the state shall not establish any religion, they like the first one, they ignore the second one. They like freedom of religion because they take it to mean that people with religion can do whatever they want, and in their case, they think it means that Christianity should be freed to be established, in fact, even though the other part says no state establishment of religion. They ignore that. They want to establish religion.
Which is no surprise, because in political populism field and religious apologetics, these acrobatics of minds can be, maneuvered whatever direction you want them go.
Yeah, and something else to point out. Many
what works for the agenda that goes.
Yeah.
It's like. Who mentioned, I think maybe Slavoj Žižek, about that shame, how shameful became the politics and the discourse because you can, avoid, distract, and just go for your point, do cherry picking, and if it works for you, it works. No shame there.
Yeah, shameless, yeah. But the point I wanted to make, to give another dimension here, many religious leaders in the U.S. do not want this. These are very religious people. They strongly want their religions to do well, but they do not want this nationalism because they see the danger that some religions could be persecuted and there could be struggles between religions. They're quite happy to have the neutral space where different religions can function well. They can all make an appeal to attract more followers, but you don't have the government directly involved. So many groups are happy with that. But there is something the nationalists and Trump are offering that is attracting more people, both in different Christian denominations and in other religions. This talk about providing state funding for religious education. In the past, this was forbidden in America. The structure was, let's say you want your child to get an education with a really strong religious element. Like say you're a very devout Catholic, you want your kid to get an education with lots of Catholic stuff, fine. You could send your kid to a Catholic school, but you would have to pay for it. The state, the government, the taxpayer would not pay a penny toward that because that would be considered the state establishing religion, the state supporting a religion. So until recent times, this was considered impossible. It was off the chart. No one would, but now Trump is offering this.
Yeah, I heard that, and it sounds quite a strong position because USA is very religious. A lot of people describe them as very religious, comparing to a lot of countries, and having that kind of situation where religious schools are not funded. It's kind of a bit strange for me because here I know the situation that there are two types of funding for private schools if they are not religious, but three types of funding for religious schools. Yeah. So you can collect even more funding if needed.
But comparing to Lithuania, though, in Lithuania, it's only certain religions who could get that funding for their schools, not all. In America, what's being talked about now, well, it's not entirely clear, as is often the case with Donald Trump's ideas and policies.
Obscurity, yeah.
And the vagueness, works well politically because different people can read into it what they want. Like when you say "Make America Great Again," it seems you're referring to some past period, but it's never specified. So people can imagine whatever American past they want to go to.
Golden Age.
So what was it the 1920s? Was it the 50s? Was it the slavery? What is ideal for you? And again, the support for education, it is not clearly worked out. I mean, maybe in the big document Project 2025, which the Trump people are closely associated with, even though Trump has denied it. And as time goes on, it's clear they're following a lot of ideas from that document. And the Project 2025, anyone who doesn't know, it was a blueprint drawn up by a conservative political foundation for the benefit of the next Republican president, who of course they expected to be Trump and who is Trump. But anyway, I don't know what Project 2025 says about school funding, but I know that what the Trump campaign and now Trump administration is doing is not clear. Religious funding, clearly they like the idea of religious, or I should say they like the idea of public funding, state funding for religious schools. It's not clear how it will work, but this attracts like Orthodox Jews. This attracts other conservative groups. They're all hoping, well, maybe now our schools can be funded. There are conservative Hindus who could easily organize Hindu schools. But this comes at a cost. If we take this money out of the government budget and shift it toward religious schools, it means there's less money for the public education. And a lot of the conservative Christians hate public education because they feel it's not religious enough, or they feel it's too secular, or they even think it's atheistic. But for Trump's overall design of government, where we can see what's happening with Elon Musk and the Doge group, where they're trying to weaken and reduce many areas of government, including attacks on universities now, which we see. Well, this fits in very well, because this means you can weaken education at the lower levels, which actually involves many more people than universities.
Yeah.
Small number of people in the U.S. go to college, university. Everyone goes to lower level. So if you can weaken that and make the religious schools more active, more attractive, it's a major, major victory for the Christian nationalism.
So you can do that early years indoctrination, most effectively.
And it's clear from many statements that what Trump and his Christian national associates want is to have a religion or an education that will give a very strong emphasis to Christianity, that will directly include Bible stories in the curriculum. And then depending on how it's done, they could try to link it up with the narrative we referred to before about America being a land of religious freedom that was mainly for the purpose of Christianity. And so they can really use what was formerly the public schools, now it will be the publicly funded religious schools, to, as you say, inculcate or indoctrinate people in the ideas of Christian nationalism.
not in Christianity, but in Christian nationalism also, because it's useful idea to keep on going with that political agenda and have supporters.
And then
in the early age,
another important part of this, which I think is quite problematic, is that if we say that America is a Christian nation, as they like to say, then who are the Americans now? Is it only Christians who believe their type of Christianity? Do we immediately say people of other religions are not entitled to be Americans, or at least they are not Americans of equal value as the Christians? What about Jews? What about Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Native American people, pagans, all these people, atheists, agnostics? Are they all second class? That's a really big question. And this goes to one of the themes I told you I would possibly talk about, which is the question of whether this is a kind of religious fascism, or if this is a fascist form.
That's one of the topics which I prepared.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that, but maybe it is too strong. What parallels between fascism and Christian nationalism do you draw?
I mean, this is a matter of perspective and interpretation. It's not a fact, I would say. But I would say a very strong case can be made that the way the Trump administration is proceeding shows a lot of parallels to fascism. So let me give a simple definition of fascism. We need that to have a good discussion. I would say main features of fascism are that it's a it's a political system that involves intense nationalism, right? I mean, Hitler was super German, Mussolini was super Italian, right, in their outlook. They are always claiming to do things for the Germans, for the Italians, etc. Okay. Secondly, it typically involves a single leader who is treated as like a godlike person. That happened to Hitler, that happened to Mussolini, and we can see among many of Trump's followers, they seem to treat him that way too. They're putting him up on a higher level than other humans. Another prominent feature of fascism is that it involves demonizing certain parts of the population. People who are seen as either inferior or even as evil or dangerous.
So in this case, who is being demonized?
Well, first of all, it's immigrants.
Oh yeah, sure.
Now that's not specifically religious, so this is a little bit outside of the paradigm. But the question is, if this program proceeds further, will non-Christians have to fear persecution? And that would be that would be a fascistic practice. And let me mention the other key element of fascism, the use of violence in politics. Now, we haven't seen that much yet, but I would say we've seen some of it with Trump, in that in his recent political career, people who oppose him are targeted on social media, and they have to fear being attacked by his followers. And I'll give a very sad, specific example. There was an attack on a synagogue in Pittsburgh some years ago during the first
synagogue.
Mm-hmm. The man who attacked the synagogue and who wanted to kill Jews explained that his motivation was that his main concern was about Latin American immigrants. And he was a Trump believer. Mm-hmm. Trump is obviously very much opposed to most immigration.
Yeah, sure. But why he was in a synagogue?
So it's a bit weird. What had happened to this man was he had become very immersed in right-wing conspiracy theory social media, and he had learned this idea that the real reason all these Hispanic immigrants are coming into America is that it's a plot by the Jews to destroy white Christian society. This was a version of the replacement theory, which you may know comes out of the Nouvelle Droite in France, Alain de Benoit and people like that. So this was an Americanized version. So and combined with the old anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that the Jews are the masterminds, they're bringing in the Hispanics to destroy white Christian America. So the way to solve the problem is kill the Jews. So this is a crazy case, but we see how Trump-associated conspiracy theories can go down this dark road. And we also know that many people in the Republican political party who previously were critical of Trump have stopped doing this because they are afraid of violence. They've had to face things like Facebook posts where people say, hey, you scumbag, we know where your child goes to school. Wouldn't it be a shame if something happened to them? So there's a lot of intimidation of people going on.
As with the ones who were at the polls when the votes were counted. Those people threatened a lot, I've seen.
So we're maybe not seeing a huge amount of fascist violence, but we see the threat of violence all over the place. And this is a definite tool of fascism.
And the government is not putting at least verbal restraints publicly and saying, calm down, and maybe set some barriers and remind some things about what we are not up to. And typically there's a silence or maybe going around the topic and not facing it.
Well, even worse than that, Trump and his associates like Elon Musk, they want to remove all restraints on social media so you can engage in all the hate speech and threats that you want. And as long as you don't directly cause harm to someone, it's okay. So this is, I think, a very awful, poisonous development. But let me go back to the phrase. So I would say, if we are to say the Trump administration has fascistic elements, the religion is not really central to that. It's more like a decoration. It's more like a recruitment tool.
Yeah.
But I would say the Christian nationalism could be considered fascist religion because they are willing, it seems, to do anything to promote their idea of a pure Christian nation.
Pureness thing, exclusionary part of it.
And even though we haven't seen so much violence from Christian nationalists, their rhetoric, their ideology really lends itself to that. Because if they believe we must save America and these people are evil, then the obvious conclusion someone could draw is, well, these people need to be killed.
Yeah.
They're a threat. We must kill them. And some of the Christian nationalists, including ones very close to Trump, they talk about people on the left, progressive people, who Trump often calls the lunatic left. Mm-hmm. They see them as demons. They don't see them as human.
I heard those phrases, yeah.
So once you dehumanize someone, it's easier to kill them. It's always the first step. It's like Hitler calling the Jews and the Roma vermin. And actually, I noticed this in political campaigns in Europe in recent years, where the Roma are still spoken of as being like vermin that should be exterminated. So once you say someone is not human and is dangerous, is bad, then extreme methods may be seen as justified. So it's very, very concerning.
From what I heard, it seems like those threats are beside the wall and the dams could be lifted anytime if needed, as we've seen in those riots near the capital. So it was like one of indications when you just let it proceed, how it goes, and these kind of things could happen anytime. And yeah.
Well, one of the really problematic things about this new Trump administration, it seems to be removing all restraints in many areas. So it's opening the way for a lot of really dangerous or violent behavior. I already mentioned doing away with restraints on hate speech.
Yeah.
Well, here's something else. The people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th in 2021 in support of Trump, people who were convicted of violent crimes against the American government, Trump has forgiven them all. So that sends a message that if you do violence on behalf of Donald Trump, you'll be forgiven. So that's really, really dangerous. And I would note that many judges now are being threatened. So many people feel the last defense against the excesses of Trump, excesses, not successes, excesses, let's be clear on that word, are the courts. Because the courts are blocking certain things. But the judges are being threatened. And some of the judges may be intimidated into going along with what the Trump government wants to do. So it's a really, really dangerous time. And I'd also note that some outstanding intellectuals and scholars who have been critics of Trump politics and Trump administrations are leaving the country, like Timothy Snyder.
Yeah.
He's gone to
I heard
Canada.
that. So,
That's very sad.
so how do you see that? I wanted to elaborate on that topic just shortly, but how do you see are people are going to flee USA and just let it rot in some sense? Or are there any movements now they are maybe protesting and trying to fight back?
Well, there's both. Many people are protesting and trying to organize resistance, but high-profile people who have good reason to fear that they could be targeted by Trump administration, they are leaving. And another dimension to this is that many foreigners, many people outside America are now choosing to not visit or do business in America because they see it as too dangerous now. For me as an American, that is so sad. My country was always like this land, this country that was admired by other people. But I feel we are losing that respect now. If anything, I think other countries feel pity and fear towards America right now.
One point which I wanted to step on, it's about New Apostolic Reformation. Can I call it a denomination of Christianity? Is it a useful term?
No, I don't think
it's not a denomination.
Well, not exactly. It's just, let's just call it a Christian organization.
Yeah. Okay. So you are saying term organization. Okay. So why I want to bring it up?
Or like maybe more like a network.
Yeah.
Like a network of like-minded people. Yeah.
You talked about that. In the press, there's a lot of attention this movement or organization attracted. It seems like it's like a most radical form of Christian nationalist religious organization or network, which evolved to the most radical state. Is it true? What you can say about this movement, and is it as influential as it looks?
I would not pretend to have deep knowledge. I have not done research on this group. I have read a number of things about them. I would say they are at the vanguard of Christian nationalism. They are the leading group, and they do have connections to Donald Trump and people in the Republican Party. So they're well connected, they're influential, but they are by no means a majority of Christians in the U.S. They are a small movement, but very powerful, very influential because they have such good connections.
So they are working as a the best vehicle for those political ideas because they are suit the best.
It's like within the International Catholic Church, you have the organization Opus Dei, which is known to be like a very extreme radical group, ultra-conservative within the Catholic Church. Maybe that's a reasonable parallel for this.
Okay, and do you have any knowledge or know or maybe or guess, is this movement radicalized by those political ideologues, and that way that these churches evolved and became as they are, or they are just, I don't know, very present, just coincidence that they theology
again,
and stance.
I don't have deep knowledge, but the way it seems to me, there's kind of a feedback loop between very conservative Republicans or Americans and these radical Christians. And one area where they have common ground is in a general agreement that the current state of American society is bad, and a opposition or even hatred toward many American institutions. And we see this reflected in Trump policy in the attack on the universities. Because many conservative politicians and many people in groups like this, they don't like the fact that the universities teach people to be critical of society and of religion. They would prefer an education where people are trained in the virtues of different religions, but where there's no, or of mainly one religion, and we know which one. But you don't really have critical discussion. So for example, you probably would not discuss the sex abuse scandals of Catholic Church. That would be seen as a minor detail. Maybe you mention it once, say, oh, there was a problem, but it's being dealt with, end of story. Or past the history in America of all the Christians who supported slavery, that would be probably glossed over. You just say, well, yes, there was some Christian support for slavery, but that's over now, no problem.
So the times were like this, and
But each group magnifies the other, because conservative, politically conservative people can find like an army of supporters here. But then the religious people can now use the politicians to advance their agenda. And something I thought important to explain about Trump's political situation, he is not only supported by these conservative Christian people, they are just one part of the coalition that elected him. You had a bunch of different groups. You have ordinary Americans who were upset about high prices at the supermarket, inflation and the economy. And they thought, well, it's not going so well under Joe Biden. And I would say, frankly, they were maybe misinformed because all the indicators were going in the right direction, but maybe not fast enough to make people happy. But they thought, okay, Trump's a businessman. Certainly, he'll take great care of the economy. Prices are going to go down. He promised so. And now, of course, with his tariff policies, we see something quite different happening. But I'll put that aside. Then you had rich people and businessmen, not necessarily religious, they like tax cuts. Trump gave the biggest tax cuts in history when he was president, and he promised to even do more this time. They thought, great, now my $5 billion can become $5.5 billion. Wow. Although, as an ordinary person, I wonder if you have $5 billion, do you really need $5.5 billion? But that's another question. Then you had people in other sectors of business, and especially the high-tech people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, who were afraid because the Biden administration for the first time was putting in place some real regulations that could affect those industries.
As Europeans,
Right. The European Union has been way ahead on that. America's been very weak. But under, what's her name? I think it's Lina Khan, one of Biden's officials, finally, there were some restrictions were being put on the high tech. Oh, they didn't like that. They're used to being kings. You should never tell Elon Musk or Peter Thiel what to do.
Yeah.
They should tell you what to do. You don't tell them what to do. So they were offended by this. Then you had people, a certain segment of American society who are opposed to vaccines, the so-called anti-vax people, and their numbers greatly expanded during COVID. And it merged with people who didn't like wearing masks. And Donald Trump, it's really ironic because his administration helped develop the COVID vaccine. They put funding into companies to develop vaccine, but then when Trump saw the vaccine wasn't popular, he backed away from it, right? And he sometimes is critical or skeptical toward vaccines. Same with masks. His administration at first said people should wear masks, will help reduce COVID, but then he saw it wasn't popular with his followers, so he abandoned it, and he became anti-mask. So that was another group that was pro-Trump. Then you have people who were not necessarily religious, but are unhappy with social changes and social movements of recent times. They don't like feminism. They don't like seeing women become more independent and having careers. They don't like all the stuff in favor of gay rights, gay marriage, trans rights. They're uncomfortable with changes happening in America. They were attracted to Trump because he promises to bring us back to the past. Whereas the Biden administration had been trying to bring about these changes, to support them, to support trans people, to help gay people. There were people who didn't like progressive ideas of protecting minorities, helping black people, helping poor people. People were against that. So there were a lot of different groups that, one more.
And a lot of social programs, which are communist and,
And then another important group, business people involved with the oil industry and related carbon fuel industry. They don't like all this stuff about fighting climate change. And Trump promised there's no climate change anymore, no problem, drill, 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 dig, 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 do whatever you want. No restrictions, no concern of the environment. So those people really loved him. So these are all groups, non-religious, who had their own reasons to support Trump. Then you add the religious people, and then he has a big coalition.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Maybe you mentioned it a little bit, but I see it as important thing. Maybe you will say that it's not. As the founding myth, there's another Christian topic, myth, and theme is about the persecution of Christians. How this mythology is played out in America, how it looks like.
Well, let me say,
is it happening actually? Maybe there's actual persecution of Christians happening.
I always find this an interesting topic because I would say it's a totally ridiculous idea that Christians are persecuted or disadvantaged in the U.S. Travel around America, go to any town, and you'll see at least a half dozen churches. People are very free to practice Christianity. The Bible is not banned. You could buy it anywhere. So Christians are very free to practice their religion. What many, or some, I should say, conservative Christians complain about is they feel that their religion should be featured in the schools, it should be associated with government, and it should even be allowed to dictate some policies. And the main example here is the abortion issue.
Yeah.
Catholics and some others have looked at abortion and said it's wrong for the government to require doctors to perform abortions. So in Catholic hospitals, they don't have to. And that means if you're a pregnant woman and you go to a Catholic hospital and there's a problem with your pregnancy that could cause the death of the mother, the doctor may choose to deliver the child and let the mother die. That's the general attitude. So what is perceived as persecution is any law that infringes on having to follow the teachings of whatever version of Christianity. So you might have people who oppose vaccines or blood transfusions for religious reasons, and they would say, this is persecution. But I would say, no, it's ridiculous, because Christianity is all over the place in America. It's thriving. There's no shortage of churches. No one is stopping anyone from going to church and practicing religion. But there are limits on Christians being able to dominate the society. I think that's what they complain about.
Yeah, domination, like values which transcend all the country, you know. It's not like freedom for yourself personally, but in enforced ideas which penetrate everything. That's the concern. And with more, maybe, I don't know, maybe more liberal politics and left-leaning politics lately, it gives discourse topic and vector to say for those populists that the Christian times are gone, and we also have to bring them back. And the persecution is...
Well, I have to say there's a racial side to this that's very ugly. But
racial side?
But it should be understood.
What do you mean?
In the 1960s, when the Supreme Court ruled and laws were passed that meant that American institutions have to be integrated, black people have to be allowed along with white people as well as other groups, there was immediately a reaction by many white Americans to take their kids out of public school and put them in religious schools. Mm-hmm. And this also refers to our earlier discussion about education.
Yeah.
So for many Americans who either are racist or at least are uncomfortable with non-white people, they see Christianity as a refuge for this. And it may not be expressed directly, but if you analyze the situation, look at how the Christianity functions, look at who is involved, look at who is not involved, who's included, who's excluded, you start to see that in many cases, Christianity functions as a kind of cover for racism. And some of those who feel persecuted are also people who object to the mixing of races, who don't like the fact that in institutions black people are treated equal to white people.
Just like a couple of days ago, I watched an old interview. It's like from 70s maybe or something like that. One of a Ku Klux Klan member was talking and defending his points.
David Duke, he was quite famous. He ran for Congress.
I don't remember. Right. But the points which he was defending was very similar. It was astonishingly similar. That interracial mixing, those values, and avoiding to say that we want to exclude everyone, but and tiptoeing on the questions, you know, who's inferior here. So it was very familiar with Christian nationalist agenda.
And you can link this to a major theme of Trump's administration now, the opposition to DEI, the opposition to wokeness.
Inclusion.
The opposition to DEI and wokeness.
Yeah.
If you analyze it, if you go into it, you realize there is some racism here. Because what DEI and wokeness, and I don't even like to use the word wokeness. To me, it's not a real word. But it's used as a derogatory term for any kind of effort to help black people. Mm-hmm. So the opposition to these things, why? Why are they against any program to help black people or protect black people? Why are they against books about black Americans being included in libraries and schools? Clearly, they prefer a version of America where black people are like off to the side, subordinate, not out front, not powerful. Maybe they can be allowed to exist, but we don't want them out front. We don't want them in power.
Am I right? What I heard that the attack mainly is on LGBT, trans, or migrant issues, but sometimes,
also black
but
people.
sometimes
It's also about race.
No. But sometimes under the same regulations or the programs which cover those minorities, black people also is covered under those programs or inclusion programs or whatever, and they are left out. But in the public discourse, Christian nationalists probably wouldn't say what we want to discriminate or something like that, or that discriminatory
they use
discourses.
code words. They use code words.
What kind of?
They don't say we're against black people. They say we're against wokeness. We're against DEI. And these are things that are associated with black people in America. And a lot of people don't know where the woke thing comes from. So let me give a little American cultural history lesson. There was a great American folk singer named Leadbelly. And he wrote a song back in the 30s or 40s, I don't remember exact date. And he talked about the danger that black people face if they're traveling in the South in the United States. Mm-hmm. And he said, and I may be messing up the words a little bit, but it's something like this. He said, if you travel through Mississippi, better stay woke. What did he mean? He meant that if you're black in Mississippi, it's dangerous for you. You better be aware that you could be attacked.
Stay alert,
Yeah. And so when Black Lives Matter movement arose after the death of Michael Brown in Missouri, in I think, was it 2014, 15, 16, I forget which year, that is when that movement really crystallized. They used this word woke to say, we want America to be aware that these are real problems black people face. Our lives matter. We should not be considered as trash. We should not be exterminated. So please be woke. That's what the woke idea was. But now, years later, conservatives like Elon Musk have made it into this evil thing. Musk refers to the woke mind virus.
So that's how anti-black position is hidden there, yeah?
And where did Elon Musk come from? Where did he grow up?
In south of Africa?
In South Africa during the time of apartheid. He's a child of the apartheid system, which privileged white people over blacks. And I would guess that he still maintains, or he's affected by his upbringing in that world. And the same with Peter Thiel. Mm-hmm. So the both of them, they're so passionate in their denunciation of DEI and wokeness. So what would they prefer? Would they like to see America become like South Africa? And here's the kicker. Do you know the one group of immigrants Trump has encouraged to come to America in recent times? South African white farmers who claim to face discrimination by black people in South Africa. So Trump is the one group he's saying, you can be refugees. We will help you. Please come. Anyone else? You know, the message is much more F you. But this one?
Crazy. We
love you. Please come. So my point was there's also a racial element to this. And it's not to say all American Christians are racists. It's not even to say all Christian nationalists are racist. I don't mean that. But within this program, what they're trying to establish seems to often have racial elements to it, to where like a sense of white supremacy is kind of interwoven with their idea of a
and
Christian
the big
nation.
Community is, black people.
Now, I should mention, because some people might think about this and want to know or be concerned, it's not to say that there are not minority people involved in the Christian nationalist movement. There are. But in any society where there is oppression of minorities, or where minorities have a difficult situation, you will always find some members of those groups who make the decision that they think the best way to survive and do well is to become friends with the majority.
Yeah.
And be willing to accept that even though this majority may dislike people like me, if I can kind of make a deal with them, maybe I'll be okay. And to use an ugly phrase from American cultural history, this kind of figure is known as the house nigger, meaning the slave who's willing to get friendly to the master so that he gets a nice position, like as a butler,
Yeah.
or something like that inside the house, doesn't have to work out in the horrible cotton field. He gets to stay inside and wear nice clothes. So this kind, or also known as an Uncle Tom.
And beat other slaves.
Maybe, or maybe not, but so there always are those who are willing to betray their own group to get advantages from the dominant group.
Yeah, sure.
So,
I think the last question, in general, I don't know if you have any insights regarding how, if those ideas spill off to another countries, or maybe already did,
yeah,
how we can influence global public discourse, and maybe it can signal that this is appropriate to do, because there are a lot of, if we would stick to religious tensions, there are a lot of religious tensions in the world, and that could get, like a free green card, to do whatever you want, and you have a back from a USA, which is the authority.
I think other countries where we see religious nationalism playing a big part are also countries that Donald Trump is very friendly with the leaders of those countries. So Donald Trump is very friendly with Vladimir Putin, and Putin practices a kind of Christian nationalism. He associates himself very close with the Orthodox Church. He claims that Russia represents the defense against the evil atheistic West.
Yeah.
We have India, where there's Hindu nationalism that often means the persecution of Muslims, and also sometimes of Christians, I would add. Trump is very friendly with Modi. Now you might think...
Is he?
Yes.
Okay.
If Trump is a Christian nationalist, or if he's affiliated with that, I don't think he's a religious person at all. I think he just goes along with this because it's useful for him. But if we say, if he's a kind of Christian nationalist, why is he hanging out with this Hindu nationalist? Same question, you could say, why is Trump friendly with Erdogan, who's practicing a kind of Islamic nationalism in Turkey? Turkey was for a long time tried very hard to be a secular country, but under Erdogan, he's promoting Islam more and more and more as the identity for Turks. Well, the reason is they all respect each other for practicing the same kind of politics. They understand each other. They know how it works. So I would imagine for Modi, looking at America, he'd say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Use Christianity as it's the majority religion, build your politics around that. And I could imagine Trump looking at Erdogan and saying, oh yeah, in your country.
Do you see it will go as a reinforcing circle for other countries?
It could lead to clashes between them. That's possible. But I think at the current time, they each respect that in their own sphere of influence, whatever form of religious nationalism fits the conditions makes sense, and they're willing to respect it. And I think, sadly, it has growing power around the world because it works very well in politics, simply because it goes to the basic strategy of us versus them. So the religious majority says we are the us, and anyone who's outside that, they are the them. It's us against them. Vote for us, we will support us, and we'll disadvantage or even destroy them. And in Lithuania, I think there is a danger here that you could have in the future like a Catholic religious nationalism here. I mean, you already have it to some extent. I think it's
yes,
but even more so.
It's not notorious now, but there are some changes which are happening. Please elaborate.
Well, look at the immigrant issue. Obviously, not many people in Lithuania are really open to immigrants. Personally, I think it's a bit sad. Lithuania has a falling population. This is the obvious way to fill up your population. You could bring young, enthusiastic people from other countries who are willing to work hard, build up the country. And yes, they can learn Lithuanian. It might take more than one generation. That's the typical story with language, but it could be done. But one of the number one reasons, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm a foreigner living here. I don't know Lithuania deeply, but it seems to me that one of the number one ideas is, oh, we don't want Muslims. And if Muslims are living here, if they want to build a mosque, do they have religious freedom to build a mosque? No. No. So is there religious freedom in Lithuania? So here, the religious nationalism is playing a bit of a role. People who see Lithuania as a Catholic country, and maybe you could tolerate some people, a few Buddhists, a few Krishnas, that's okay. But we don't want a lot of them coming in. And there's a special animosity toward Muslims, which I think is unfortunate.
As I would say, we have these, predestinations, or for Christian nationalism in Lithuania.
Predilection, yeah.
Because we have a founding myth, because Catholic Church was strongly involved in politics and surely helped in some ways for a government and for
the foundation of Vilnius University was a Christian seminary, first of all.
So there are a lot of points which can be molded and is already now molded in that founding myth, as I would say. We have some denominations which are very conservative. We have a couple of parties which they portray them as Christian, very similar to Christian nationalism, and we are upset about immigration politics, which is very uncontrolled. So a lot of parts of a Christian nationalism going wild and extreme were rather set in place already. But as I asked, if that political, because when you are making some political moves, you gain and lose something.
Right.
So I think it's more undecided, how those parties are going to go.
I think we have to look to what happens in education here, because if Catholic authorities have control of education, they will promote textbooks, classes, lessons that teach that Catholicism is the foundation of Lithuania. And as you said, of course, in many ways, Catholicism contributed a lot.
Yeah.
But to say it's the only thing, what about the Jewish history, the thriving Jewish community that was here? What about the Tatars who have lived here? And going further back in time, what about the people before the Christians, the pagans, we could call them, whose folklore or who contribute a lot to what's now considered folklore in Lithuanian culture? So the danger in this regard I see is that if the education becomes narrow and just has a Catholic nationalist narrative, it's unfortunate, because it means Lithuanians will be ignorant about the reality of their own society, the diversity of their own society and history.
Yeah.
And it's funny, because I've been around Lithuanians long enough to know how proud people are of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania.
Yeah.
And one of the things people celebrate is it was so diverse.
Yeah.
Gediminas invited all these people to come.
That's a story.
We had Catholics, we had Protestants, we had pagans, we had Orthodox, we had Scotch people coming, we had all these different people. We had people coming from the Middle East, we had Tatars. Vytautas gave special rights to Tatars and Jews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So people love that diversity, but then sometimes they turn it off and say, oh yeah, well, yesterday we talked about diversity, but guess what? Today, we're going to say Lithuania is just a Catholic country.
Michael, I want to thank you for this interview.
Okay. Good to be with you. Glad we could have a conversation.
Thanks. Čia buvo Michaelas Rimska, čia Skeptiški pokalbiai. Sekite Skeptikų draugijos veiklą Facebook'e, klausykit podcastų audio formatu Spotify platformoje, žiūrėkit epizodus Patreon platformoje ir iki kitų epizodų. Iki kol kas.